I'm reading a headline here, Jeff, and it says 59% of Americans say we're in a recession. And the current administration is going, no, we're not, no, we're not, no, we're not. Because technically, I'm not sure. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. Maybe a year from now, they'll find out we were. But the truth is 59% of Americans think we are in a recession. And I made the claim, maybe since I've talked to you, but I've certainly made it many times since, that the final straw, the final drop, the final thing that happened that put us over the edge is building inventories of automobiles at retailers. And what do you think?
Yeah, the data has come out for June and July. A lot of people prescribed June to be in the CDK outage, this dealer network software outage, but it really didn't snap back in July, and the uptrend is still in track that's been floating up the entire year. It started last year with EVs getting to over 100 days, and then starting the new year over 150 days. And now you've got the rest of auto, including EVs. So everything sold in the United States in the wholesale is now over just over 100 days of inventory, and that's double what they target. Some of the auto manufacturers are more than triple the target. They're at 150 days, like Stellantis, and this is a precursor to shift closures, factory slowdowns, furloughs, then layoffs, then shutdowns. And it's also a precursor to discounting. And if it comes, if you come full circle to Tesla, they left the quarter with 18 days of inventory, and they don't have the dealer network. And they're in a much better position, but it would be naive to say that the heavy discounting that will probably be coming, it's not in the data yet, by the way. The discounting is in the legacy EV data. It's not in the rest of auto. If you look at auto at a macro level, there's not heavy discounting in the average transaction price yet, but the incentives are creeping up. So incentives are creeping up, prices are holding steady, but inventory is growing. So they're giving themselves sales credit. So when you hear the GM, you hear the Ford, you hear these earnings reports are like, wow, we beat top line, we beat bottom line, but they're shipping more into dealer inventory than what's actually selling out to consumers.
Yeah, so if we already had housing in a recession, we already had manufacturing in a recession, we had transportation, which is probably partially because of manufacturing not doing well. You had transportation, trucking, et cetera, in a recession for 2 years. Small businesses continuing. The NFIB report came out on Tuesday. The small businesses are saying, we don't see it. It's not good. Things are not going well. And then this morning, let me just ask you, because what I really want to circle back to is just how well Tesla is positioned for a recession. You and I may have had this conversation a year ago, the last time when all the pundits thought we were going into a recession, but now I think we either are or are going to, and I'd like to have that conversation again. So what was I going to say, Jeff? You're gonna have to remind me.
You're talking about, we had the conversation a year ago, and where everybody thought we were going in, and then where we are today, and what does it mean for Tesla?
Yeah. So what do you think? Oh, I know you were going to say you told me earlier that you see a problem with not just the current situation in the auto field, but also that people are having trouble getting loans. People are stretched on their loans. In general, I think what's happening is that maybe even more than just the under $100,000 group, maybe we're starting to creep into the $125,000, $150,000 household income group. They're overextended, and they're not looking to buy a swimming pool. Home Depot said they're not looking to buy a spa. They're not looking to buy a swimming pool. They've cut that out right now. That would also be true for cars, right?
Yeah. And I post this on my timeline. I guess I could pin it. It's really important data. It didn't get a lot of interaction, but there's just data published, I think Monday or Tuesday, that said basically there's a loan availability index, and it was partitioned for auto, and it's at its lowest level in 10 years. Even it's approaching, if you take COVID out, it's the lowest level in 10 years. If you add COVID in, it's actually very close to the worst period of March through June of 2020 of COVID is the actual period now, and they're measuring the availability of loans. It's also down. This index is down 4 months in a row. So every month it's ticking lower or more unfavorable. And they even restated June lower when they published the July data. So this is why you see Tesla putting on the interest rate incentives.
Right.
You see, which are really honestly following the other automakers that even have their own captive financing. And so this will continue. You have to make the total monthly payment bearable for consumers. But if you just look at the loan availability data, there's also something the New York Fed measures called a loan rejection rate. And the last time I looked at that was also at a 10-year high. I think it was somewhere between 13 and 16% of people applying. So that could be 13 to 16% of people applying to get a loan for a Tesla too. So just think about what would happen with Tesla sales if that number was cut in half. It just gives you an idea of that there is a weight on the auto industry. And you see it now with 100 days of inventory. It's double the aggregate, and it's triple on the high side. And Tesla, though, I think Tesla saw this sooner because they have their supply chains localized around their factories, and then they only have the 18 days in channel. And by having that, it's something called the span of your supply network, or the number of days, or the total time of that network. The total time in network and the number of nodes, Tesla has a distinct advantage over the other automakers. And so this would allow them to basically, in a long story short, to enter into a slowdown faster. So they would see it sooner. So when people were putting their hand, scratching their heads and saying, hey, why are GM and Ford posting these great numbers and raising guidance, and Tesla's, cutting people, walking them out the door, and then, and discounting product? Because they see it sooner.
Right.
It's physics. It's the actual design of their supply chain. It's the design of their sellout or their network, their distribution network. It's the way it's designed, and the whole thing mashed together, including their very low process times to actually make a vehicle from raw material in to vehicle out. When you mash all that together, supplier network, factory, and then their outbound network, it's shorter, it's less nodes, less process time. They'll see the recession faster, they'll climb out of it faster. And that's why we may be seeing them having a little bit of a resurgence here in Q3. In Q2, they had a decision. I wish they would have said this on the earnings call, because everybody came down on them on the Q2 earnings call because of their gross margins.
Right.
And Tesla could have easily said, you know what? We could have left the 24 to 26 days of inventory and channel and just built more fresh product with our new cost reductions. We would have elevated the utilization rates in our factory. We would have lowered our fixed cost burden per unit, and we would have raised our gross margins. And we probably wouldn't have had the 180 basis points miss. We may not have had a miss at all.
Right.
And they could have said that, but they didn't. So what they did, though, is in the midst of an I agree with what they did, which was you get the working capital off the books, you keep your inventory tight back to your nominal levels. I think they made the right decision. Now they're set up to increase production this quarter, increase output this quarter, and let's see what happens on the gross margin side, because obviously there's the interest, the financing deals they're doing.
So what I was starting to say a minute ago, my mind just went like that, was that there's such a thing as a full employment recession. We don't have them often. It's a very, very, in the writings that I've done on recessions in the past, this is not your most common situation, but we could be in that situation, in which case the Fed may not cut. I know I'm like the only person still saying this, and I was pretty sure they were going to cut in September until today's numbers. Today's inflation numbers, I don't think helped the Fed at all. They're still at 2.9, 3.3. I don't know why people think that the Fed is going to cut while they're still at those levels, unless they see even more deterioration on the job side, which can happen. We've got another jobs report before the September Fed meeting, and maybe we'll see that, and of course, the weekly unemployment figures. But without further deterioration in labor, I'm not 100% sure they're going to start the cutting cycle in September. What do you think?
Well, you've had deterioration in labor at its trough. Unemployment was in the 3.4 to 3.6 level, and now it's up at 4.3. So you're at 0.7, 0.9, depending on where you call it, increase. That's a very, very large increase in unemployment inside of a given cycle. That's a huge increase. That movement in itself, in the short period of time it's happened, is actually a significant issue. But I don't think, unless you have this gigantic event like the Great Financial Crisis in 2008, where you had, the banks imploding, the real estate market imploding, and you had a number of events that, black swan events that happened together. That was largely, viewed as like everything's going into recession at the same time. The auto industry, everything. We looked at the auto industry data, and from peak to trough, I think there was about a 30% drawdown in sales. If you look at 07, through 09. So that was viewed. But so in this case, I think to answer your question is, I think we just could be in this series of rolling recessions. I think auto is going into it, or is in it actually, with the 100 days of inventory and growing. So I think we could have a rolling recession. You could have it, in housing. You could have it in a number of different areas where it rolls in, it rolls out, based on the health of it. But yeah, I would agree if you just look at the GDP number, which I think they're predicting the upper twos.
Right.
You look at unemployment, you wouldn't say that you're in a broad recession. You wouldn't say it.
Right. Yeah. So taking all that into consideration, and let's call it, they might want to call it a soft landing. I might call it a soft landing, and then maybe not so soft, but maybe we are in this kind of dead zone, kind of a not great, not horrible situation. But we're half of the population, more than half, 59% think we are in a recession, and maybe acting like we're in a recession in terms of some, especially the larger purchases. Then my argument last year was, and I think it's even more true this year, is that Tesla is better positioned maybe than 99% of all companies, much less auto companies, to not only based on what you just went over, we don't want to duplicate that, but there's a bunch of other reasons why Tesla's well positioned. Throw out any other ideas that you have, and then I'll come back as well.
Well, the macro EV market is still growing. That's one reason. So we're if you look at China, if you look at Europe, the only reason the US growth rate slowed was because of the dynamic we just talked about, is that the non-Tesla auto industry moved a bunch of product into the channel, and they expanded the channel days of inventory. They get credit for a sale when they do that. But what happens is when that span of inventory grows, the dealers say, I don't want any more. So therefore, then it stops growing, even though they have the ability to produce. It stops growing because their product is too high priced and not moving it in channel. So that's why the US slowed down. China is still, going. So why would Tesla still do well? One, as I talked about, there's their network efficiency and inventory efficiency, but two would be just the broader EV market and it continuing to grow. So let's say the broader auto industry has a recession. What if there is a 20 or 30% drawdown? If EV is still growing inside of that, it could cut that slowdown in half. It could cut it. It could actually negate the whole slowdown, depending on the rate of EV growth. So that would be a little bit pie in the sky. The point is the broader auto industry would see a much bigger and longer slowdown because of the inventory they have. They may see the 30% or more drawdown, and they also have to work off that capital off the books. So that's the other piece of it. The other thing I've been looking at too is I've been studying the balance sheet inventory of these auto manufacturers, and I looked at Toyota, because Toyota is the number 2 company behind Tesla in terms of days of inventory. They're the second best, and they're really well regarded in supply chain world of having a
Right.
great
Right.
automobile supply chain. But their balance sheet inventory, this is what's in the four walls of their factories and their supplier liability. I looked at the numbers. They had $34.6 billion of balance sheet inventory into $78 billion of quarterly sales. So basically 40% of their quarterly sales, um, they have inventory. The inventory ratio is 40% of their quarterly sales is tied up, is in inventory in their factory. That same metric for Tesla, $3.1 billion of balance sheet inventory in the 25.5 billion in sales, which is about 13 or 14, around 13%. So Tesla is 13%. So that's another reason I think they'll do well, not only in the channel inventory side, but also the inventory they're carrying in their factory in that ratio. So even the second best company in the highly regarded Toyota supply chain, they're carrying a lot of inventory, and then GM and Ford are in really bad shape there. And then finally, I do think they've got a pretty good. We're right in the crux now of some new products coming out for the first half of the year. New products are the kryptonite to a slowdown. If you can introduce successively highly regarded, high demand new products that people want, those things can shoot up even in the middle of a recession. I saw this in the smartphone world. Apple and Android, we launched the smartphone business in the middle of the great financial crisis, and we sold as many as we could make.
Yeah, so I love that point, and very few people think about that unless they've actually been in it.
Yeah.
And we were exactly the same. As soon as, I mean, we actually did it annually. We would introduce our products in November so that we could fill up the distribution channel off season in the bicycle world. So we would, flatten out our year by introducing those new products at that time. And so, and the same thing is true, obviously, in a recession. If you have a good product, you got to introduce a good product. But I was
Yes.
thinking in particular, we're under 60 days now away from October 10th. So we're going to be introducing a product that may have a pretty big impact in terms of FSD uptake and in terms of the number of cars that are getting purchased in order for people to get FSD for their own personal use or, as you and I talked about last week, entrepreneurs that might start buying up some product. Maybe I'm wrong and it's only a little bit, but it's all in the margins. If it's an extra 1 or 2 or 3% of sales, it does have a pretty big impact, especially in a recessionary situation. Another one.
It's a new paradigm. I mean, they're not just launching a new product. It's a new business. It's a new paradigm of ride hailing, and where it can actually economically and in volume scale. So it's a new paradigm. It's not even just a new product launch. When I say new products, I think it's those first half vehicle launches. It's the Cybertruck continuing to scale. And when you have products like that, those can actually be recession busters. They absolutely can.
Yeah, and then in my book on recessions, which didn't sell, by the way, so if anybody would like a copy of a book about recessions, give me a call. I'll be happy to send it out to you. It's like the only 1 or 2 books out of 13 books. That was one. There was another one that didn't sell. Anyway, but what we're dealing with, the number one thing I used to say in the book was, when you're heading into a recession, you think you're heading a recession, get cash rich. Now, inventory reduction would have been number 2, but that's a part of getting cash rich. So they're sitting on over 30 billion, right? At this point in cash and cash equivalents, and no debt. Comparing that,
so they have a very small revolver that they took out. Yeah, it's a couple billion. Yeah.
And so when you compare that not only to the other auto companies, which most of them are completely the opposite, but when you compare it to most companies, they don't have that kind of a cushion with a wide open opportunity to add debt if necessary, and maybe at pretty low rates, if in fact the rates keep coming down as expected.
Yeah, no, they're in a good position. I think that's one of the reasons they wanted to get that working capital off the books. They also got lean on their Bitcoin stuff, and And that's why Elon is so focused on this return on invested capital. Like when he procures these GPUs, he's focused on how many hours and days is it from, the the trucks arriving to the site and dumping them off until they're actually plugged in and producing useful production and output. And people don't hang on that enough. But when he talks about how many hours and days it is to get those clusters up and running, that is somebody who really understands the concept of cash conversion and the concept of ROIC, return on invested capital. And that's great. That's something. I'm not giving investment advice, but you want to invest in leaders that know how to do that.
Yeah, and then Truist this morning added their name. I guess maybe they've said this before, I just haven't noticed. But they, like a couple of the other really good analysts of Tesla, they said, look, we're only figuring 30%, whatever, I can't remember the exact percentage of the value of Tesla is in the auto business. The rest of it is in these other businesses that they are either already in, like energy, or the businesses that they're going to get into, like robotics and what do you call it? Yeah, wow, I'm having a rough afternoon here.
Energy side, yeah, energy,
the AI, the internet,
AI, yep.
AI, right. And so I've seen it that way forever. I can't say how many times on this channel that I believe the 410 that we hit, the all-time high, was 100% FOMO about robotaxi because people thought it was going to happen next Thursday, but it didn't. I mean, it wasn't 100% of that. There was a lot of other factors, but that was the real driver that put us up there. So this optionality of the things that Tesla is yet to do and that people really think Elon will do because he always does, maybe late, but he does them. That optionality, I've believed it was a big part of the price all along. What do you think?
This may be one where we don't agree.
Okay.
At the time, I accept it as it definitely is a potential. I'm not dismissing it. But at the time, the business was growing the top line at somewhere between 50 to 100%. And then gross margins were going into the mid to upper 20s. And so I think people looked at that and said, when are EVs going to stop growing? And by the way, nobody was there from a competition perspective. And so like Tesla has this all to themselves. Their gross margins are going through the roof. Their growth is going through the roof. And it definitely overshot to that 414. Like I think it had a 255 or something forward PE. So there's definitely an overshoot involved. And that usually happens in those situations. And a lot of stocks, a lot of tech stocks overshot in that November 2021 timeframe. But I actually think a lot of it was tied to that. There wasn't I know there was a discussion in AI Day of, robo taxis and, imminent, but there really wasn't a robo taxi launch event. There wasn't a plan like this is when the network goes live. But I know there was a promise of getting full self-driving like every year, but I don't know if I'm sure it had some portion, right? How else was an auto company at 255 times? But yeah, I just think it was growing. It was growing a lot, and nobody knew where the ceiling was on EV growth.
And then the last thing I'd like to talk about, we've only got a few minutes, but this morning, there, I think I'm going to take a pill because I keep having these brain
Long day.
It's maybe a long day. That might be part of it. So the implication this morning was in that same Truist article was that Dojo, that they believe that there is a business that's going to be developed around training as a service. And pretty much every time I bring this up on my channel with everybody, all my buddies, they're all discounting that as, nah, that's never going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But Truist seems to continue to take Elon at his original word that this is a potential business.
Well, Elon flipped a year ago. I think he stunned people and concerned people when he didn't have any chips from NVIDIA. He was behind his competitors in bringing up his GPU clusters, and he jumped on the earnings call and when the conversation of Dojo came up, he said less than 10% chance of it ever working. But that was an open air negotiation to NVIDIA that says, I need more. And by the way, I have nothing, I'm not threatening you with anything, because there was a relationship where NVIDIA was supplying the inference and perception side for Tesla vehicles, and Tesla ripped them out, and Tesla hired their own development team and did it. So that left a bad taste in the mouth. And everybody publicly knew Tesla kicked off this Dojo effort to own the training side. So I think that was a negotiation to get more chips quickly. But now, a year later, he's got these two gigantic GPU clusters up. He's been a great partner and customer of NVIDIA, but the prices haven't come down and the supply really hasn't improved when he can get what he wants when he needs it. And so I think as a procurement and kind of a sourcing professional, I thought he handled it perfectly on the last earnings call, which was like, they're a great partner and they're going to continue to be a great partner, but this stuff costs too much and there's not enough of it. So I got to get into the business myself. And oh, by the way, I think we're going to catch them within a year and we're going to have our own stuff up and going.
And then Dojo 2 comes out today, and Dr. John is the only one I've actually heard his video, but I've seen a couple of quick notes in X that apparently it's pretty much up there and equal to all the other guys that are out.
Yeah. And you don't go from zero or less than 10% probability to like, we're going to catch them next year, like almost a certainty. You don't flip like that unless you're inside of a negotiation. So that's what we witnessed. And I thought it was handled really well. And at the end, in terms of end state, Tesla still has the NVIDIA relationship. They're a huge, partner of them. They have the best self-driving solution as espoused by Jensen Huang, but they've also they let the world know that we're doing our own thing and we're going to ramp that up too.
Have you had a chance to play with Grok 2 yet?
I have. I think it's fascinating. It's got this additional ability to reason. You can even ask it about yourself and put your Twitter handle in, and it gives you a fairly good summary of like who you are in the Twitter world. And try it.
Yeah,
and this just shows you the direction that both the vehicle will have a brain powered by Grok, and the humanoid will. And you're seeing the power right now through a keyboard on your desktop or phone. But man, when that goes inside of the humanoid or that goes inside of the Tesla vehicle, you will have superhuman intelligence while you're driving or while you have this humanoid either working in a factory or assisting you. And it's really powerful what they're building. They've caught up to the Claude Sonnet. They've caught up to these other ones. Now, it's not perfect. It's called a mini, it's like a Grok 2 mini beta. Right. So they've got to work some bugs out. But man, its ability to reason is pretty stunning.
All right. Well, I know you got to go, so I'm going to let you out of here, and we'll continue, folks, and take a look at where the stocks ended up today in just a second. Thank you, as always, for jumping on Wednesdays, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you.
So let's take a look at what happened today. We have the Dow Jones up 242.75. We have NASDAQ up 4.99. We have the S&P up 20.78 and Tesla down $6.45. We have the rest of the Magnificent Seven mixed, almost exactly half and half. Can't be half and half when it's seven guys, seven companies, but you know what I'm talking about. And we've got the Cathie Woods basically down, except for PayPal, who had a great day in the face of everybody else being down. I've already talked a lot about what I think is going on. I think you have Tesla just disconnected again from the market yesterday, huge up. If you look at the 2 days, you're up $4 over 2 days, which is a pretty dang good result on a $200 stock. But if you look at it day by day, you're like, what in the heck is going on? That's how I see it anyway. Dow Jones was up 0.61%. These are for the folks that like the percentages. NASDAQ up 0.03. The S&P up 0.38 and Tesla down 3.1. All right, we have the 10-year bond numbers coming in already, of course, because it's 4 o'clock. And the 10 years, let me go to it right away here. Oops. I'm wondering if it's not in. I thought, well, it's either not in yet at 4 o'clock. I thought it would be, or it's unchanged. 3.839 is where it's sitting right now. And the 2-year is at 3.96, almost, well, 12 basis points, 12 basis points, dividing those two. The 2-month at 5.303, putting it at 147 or something, a huge amount of basis points on the other side of that. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the oil. Oil has, the Brent is unchanged. The Texas Intermediate is up 34 cents, but Brent is now under 80 cents again. Texas Intermediate 77.32. So there's a lot of conversation about the possibility that nothing's going to happen in the Middle East with regard to Iran and Israel. So things have settled down, but natural gas continues up 0.27 in the pre-market to 2.225. Gold up $5.90, but back under 2,500 on the day because it was down earlier, but picking back up a little in the pre-market. Silver at 27.63, up 1% in the pre-market, and copper down a tad, 0.07 at $4.03.7. The dollar is basically unchanged, slightly up against the yen and the euro. And Bitcoin down 1784 on the day at 58,971, back under 60. You've got the pre-market right now. For the equities, not much movement here. You've got the Dow up 26 or 0.06%, S&P up 1.75 or 0.03, basically unchanged, and the NASDAQ up 12.25 or 0.06. So not a lot of movement there, not a lot of help in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow in those. And I'm still not getting anything on the bonds. I don't understand why all of a sudden the bonds are not showing this early. Okay, that I think is it, folks. So let me say adieu until tomorrow morning after the bell. And we'll see what happens when those unemployment numbers come in tomorrow, along with quite a number of other stats that you'll care about. Patreon, remember, you've been thinking about it. You've thought, yeah, Randy, I really should. You know, it's only $3 a month, or maybe I could do 5. And you're back and forth, like, should I, shouldn't I? You should. It's been great talking to you.